1 Edward 1029, copy, threatening traffic.
Copy, moving route.
Edward 1029, if you can please respond to 2020 McNeil Street, Lake.
Copy. If you still have run on, give me ATO information first.
Welcome to Shooting Straight with Brad and Casey. I'm Brad Carlyon, your Navajo County attorney, and my partner is Casey Clark, our Navajo County sheriff. We have some special guests with us this month. We have the Arizona Supreme Court Chief Justice Scott Bales and Justice Brutinel as our guests. Thank you both for joining us. We appreciate that you come up to our neck of the woods.
Absolute honor to have you here.
Sheriff, it's great to be here.
Thank you.
I think everybody has heard of a Supreme Court, but I'm not sure if everybody understands what the duties and functions of the Supreme Court and the justices are. Can you help explain that to us?
Well, we can try. You know, in Arizona, in our state courts, our Supreme Court, as the name suggests, is the court of last resort. So in a sense, we have oversight over the rest of the state courts as well as the municipal courts and the justices of the peace. So depending on how you look at it, we're either at the top of a pyramid that involves a couple million cases, or we're at the bottom of a funnel.
So I didn't realize that. So a justice court case can end up in your court?
It can. It'd be somewhat unusual. Most of the cases that end up before our court are the ones that have been decided in the superior courts, and then they've gone through the Court of Appeals.
Okay.
Although we're here to hear a couple of cases tomorrow at the local high school, and one of those cases actually did arise in the municipal court. So it does happen.
And that was the medical marijuana case.
That's right.
Right.
So how does a case eventually get to you on the Supreme Court level? It sounds like it has to go through a few different levels first, since you're talking about this funnel effect.
Yeah, in most cases, we have discretionary jurisdiction. So people who followed the United States Supreme Court have probably read about how thousands of petitions are filed each year seeking review. We have a similar process, but we only have about 1,000 cases each year that are filed. And we meet monthly and decide among them which ones we'll hear. The two that we're going to hear tomorrow are actually examples of that. There are some exceptions where we have mandatory jurisdiction. Anytime a jury imposes a death sentence in Arizona, that case automatically is appealed directly to our court. And then there are certain election cases where we have mandatory direct jurisdiction because they need to be decided quickly. And then finally, in the relatively rare instances where one county sues another, we actually hear those in the first instance. So in that kind of a case, we sort of serve as a trial court. But for most of our cases, we decide whether or not to grant review. And when we do, we usually tell the parties what? They have about 20 days to file supplemental briefs, and then we set the cases for argument.
So do you, when you say you decide, is it, you know, the three of you have to say yes, or do you usually come together when you want to hear a case? Or
The way it works is once a case is brought to us for review, as the chief said, we sit down and look at those cases and decide which ones are of sufficient statewide importance that we need to take them. Once we decide to take the case, as he said, we ask for supplemental briefing and we set it for oral argument. Just like will happen tomorrow, the parties will come in and argue the case, and then pretty much immediately afterwards, the five of us will sit down and decide the case. It's an interesting process. I was a trial judge for a number of years, and I'm used to just making decisions. We all sit down in a room, and it's very formal, just like the United States Supreme Court. The most senior justice, not the chief, starts and says whatever he wants to say about the case, and we go around the room in order of seniority. The chief speaks last. We see if we have some consensus at that point, and then it's really a free-form debate after that until we reach some agreement. I think the chief would tell you that it's interesting how frequently we see things the same way. We try to be unanimous, and we work hard for that, and we almost always achieve that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because our court will issue opinions in maybe 36 or 40 cases a year. We have 5 justices. For comparison, the United States Supreme Court has 9 justices, and they issue 70 or so cases a year. But they're often, in the most high-profile cases, they'll be closely divided. And every year of their 70 or so cases, there'll be many cases in which there are dissenting opinions. On our court, we have a very, very high degree of unanimity. There may only be a few cases every year where there's even a dissent. And in terms of deciding what we take, it's based on majority vote, just like when we actually decide the outcome of a case we've reviewed. So if 3 justices think we should review a case, we review it.
Do you have much debate on those issues too, as to what comes up? Or is that another area that you're kind of uniform on your thought processes?
Again, when you look at a set of 40 or so cases and try to say how many are you going to take, which are you going to take, it's surprising how often we all think the same cases are interesting, or are cases that are worthy of the Supreme Court taking them. Having said that, we frequently have lengthy debates about which of them we ought to take and what the reasons for taking them would be.
You used an interesting word. The case is interesting. Yeah. What makes it of an interest for you to actually bring up? Because you bring such a small number that you get asked to take. What is it that makes it worthy of the Arizona Supreme Court to take a look at?
We have court rules that talk a little bit about that, because under the rules of appellate procedure, a party that wants us to review a case should focus on whether there's disagreement among the courts of appeals, whether it's a case that involves an issue of first impression, a legal issue that hasn't been decided before, whether perhaps our own prior cases need to be reconsidered or overruled. So all those factors are supposed to be addressed in the petition for review, but of course, from the justice's perspective, the relative importance of an issue might vary. Whether we should decide it in this case as opposed to waiting and sort of seeing how the law develops in the Court of Appeals is another consideration.
One of the criteria is manifest injustice. Every so often you'll see one and you'll say the Supreme Court ought to take this up, or this was simply wrong and it's something we ought to talk about.
So, again, you were a trial judge in Navajo County. And a prosecutor, you said?
No, I was in private practice before that.
Yeah.
I was a civil lawyer.
It's civil. So, then one day you put in for this position and the governor picks the position, or?
Well, there's a body called the Commission on Appellate Court Appointments. So the way that works is you make application when a position opens up. The Chief Justice chairs that commission. They go through the applications and decide which of the people that have applied they're going to give interviews to. I chair the Maricopa County Commission on Trial Court Appointments. There's a similar process in the largest counties. We typically interview around half of the people that apply. Once that's done, the commission does due diligence. They look into a person's criminal history. They look into bar discipline and judicial discipline. They look at a person's background. They talk to lawyers and judges that you've worked with to see if you work and deal well with others. And at the end of that process, they vote to send names to the governor. And the Constitution requires that they send a minimum number of names. They have to send at least 3. They have to be of different political parties. They can send more than that as long as they have the same political breakdown, that is 60% from one party and the remainder from others. The governor then looks at the names that have been sent to him in this case, and makes a decision as to who the new justice is going to be.
Yeah, this system actually is one the voters approved in 1974. So for all of our appellate judges, it goes through the process that Justice Brutinel described, and for the trial judges in our largest counties, now Maricopa, Pima, Pinal, you go through this public nomination process, and it's really distinguished by both public involvement and transparency, because when there's a vacancy, it's publicly announced. People who are interested in applying submit applications that are put up on the court's website. The commissions then meet in open session. They take public comment. And each commission's 15 people, and 10 of them have to be non-lawyers. So the commission looks at the applications. They decide who among the candidates they want to interview. They do the interviews in public. And then at the end of the day, they vote to send a list of names to the governor, and the governor's required within 60 days to appoint someone from the list. And it's a very timely question, because we actually have a vacancy on our court now. One of our colleagues, Justice Birch, retired, And Governor Ducey will be appointing someone probably by the end of the year to take her seat.
Well, that's very interesting that the commission is non-lawyers. I mean,
well, 10 non-lawyers, 5 lawyers, and under our Constitution, it has to be people both from different political parties and people from all around the state. So it really does reflect input from a lot of different perspectives.
And Judge Brutinel, I assume that when you were a Yavapai County Superior Court judge, you were elected by a popular vote.
That's exactly
and
right,
now
5 times.
And now you got the merit selection process to get to the Supreme Court. You've worked under both. What are your views of the strengths and the weaknesses of the two? You
know, the first time I ran, I thought this is a really schizophrenic system, that some people have to run in contested races and others don't. I think the system Arizona has makes a lot of sense, and it works really well. In Yavapai County, just like in Navajo County, people know who their judges are. In Yavapai County, when I ran, there were 6 elected judges. I think there are 10 now. So people knew who I was, the same as they know who you are, they know what you do, they know whether they want to vote for you or not. In Maricopa County, there are 98 elected judges, and nobody knows who they are, to any degree. And if you had that many names on a ballot and try to say, should I make the conscious decision in a contested race, that would be very difficult to do. So in Maricopa County, it works very well. It also has the wonderful benefit of it keeps a lot of big money out of judicial races. I think in Texas recently, they had a race for the Texas Supreme Court, and it was $3 million aside for that election.
Same in California.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's hard for me to argue that if you spend that kind of money to get a candidate elected, that you don't expect something for that money. And Justice Bales and I both ran for retention in the last election. Nobody gave us money. So you don't have to worry about who I was taking money from to get my job.
In a small county, they don't give you money either.
They don't. But it seems like nobody wants to spend money on a small county.
That's true.
Races are not very expensive.
Well, when you talk about the retention, there was, I think in this last election a couple years ago, there was one judge in Maricopa was not retained.
That's right.
And so, because some people said that system doesn't work, but I think that showed it did work.
Well, that's another good point, because it's another way there's public input and accountability in the process. People like Justice Brutinel and I, we're on the ballot every 6 years. The Superior Court judges are on the ballot every 4. And there's also a process called judicial performance review, where they actually survey people who are lawyers or litigants or witnesses in the different courts, and they ask them to provide feedback, and the Commission on Judicial Performance Review evaluates the judges with that input and other input, and they make recommendations. And the judge that you mentioned who was not retained got a no recommendation, and the voters responded, and I think that's appropriate.
I know there's more to your jobs than just hearing these cases and deciding them. What other responsibilities do you have as justices?
Sometimes we appear on TV.
That's the fun part.
Well, with great hosts.
With great hosts.
Just don't forget that.
Well, you want to talk a little bit about some of the responsibilities you have?
Let me talk briefly about it, and then he can talk about being the Chief Justice, which is a whole other dimension of responsibility. First of all, the Chief has a strategic plan, and he's a very active Chief Justice, and so there are all sorts of initiatives that he likes to ask people to help him with. So I think we're going to look at civil justice reform. We're talking about bringing some people together to talk about the juvenile dependency system. We've been trying to, there's things he's asked me to be a part of. We've been working on time standards for the resolution of cases in all of the courts in the state of Arizona. That is benchmarks that we could judge ourselves against. We've looked at a policy for the use of wireless technology in the courts. So we get a lot of committee work and opportunities to participate in that sort of thing. We get asked to speak on a regular basis. I think it's probably 2 or 3 times a month for me, and probably 2 or 3 times a week for the Chief Justice. So there are a lot of outside kinds of things
across
that we
the
do.
state?
Across the state, yeah. And I think we're pretty good about going where people ask us to go. We try to do things like we're doing tomorrow to get outside of Phoenix and go to high schools and colleges and let people know what the court does and give them an opportunity to see how we work. So there's a lot of that kind of thing.
Well, and under our Constitution, the Supreme Court has administrative oversight over all of our courts, and there's about 550 judicial officers around the state, everything from hearing officers to the various kinds of judges. But that's only part of the judicial branch. We have nearly 10,000 employees in the state courts, and that includes people who work in probation, it includes people who work in juvenile justice. We regulate the admission to the practice of law and lawyer discipline. We do the same for court reporters, for court-appointed fiduciaries. So there's a lot going on, and to do that successfully, we often have to do things in cooperation with other branches of government, and you know that here in Navajo County. For example, we're trying to promote the use of specialty courts such as drug courts around the state, and for that to succeed we need cooperation, as we've had from the sheriff's office here and from the county attorney's office.
And we need some money.
Well, and we know too that we have a lot of issues where you have overlapping jurisdictions. So here you have a case that might occur on the Navajo reservation, and depending on the nature of the offense, it might be in state court, it might be in tribal court, it might be in federal court. So we need to work to interact with not only the different branches of our state government, but sometimes different governments.
You know, when we talked about the drug courts, excuse me, I had worked undercover narcotics for most of my career, and I went to a drug court training back in New York, and I mean, I rained terror on drug dealers. And I arrested them and arrested them and arrested them, and then I arrested them again and again, and then their kids. Drug courts do work. These specialty courts do work. We started a veterans court, and the people need that, and we've got to change the way we're doing business because it hasn't been working. Incarceration is probably not the...
But it is tough in rural Arizona because we don't have the dollars.
Yeah.
We were hit first in the recession. We still haven't recovered. We still have lost about 1/3 of our general fund monies, and it's been a struggle to keep the drug courts going. We've had to be very innovative in the veterans courts, so there was no financial impact just at time. But those are things we support and want. We just got to figure out how to get better treatment and treatment we can afford.
I agree with every bit of that, but it also offers a wonderful opportunity to reorient how you do business. I did drug courts in Yavapai County, and the idea that we take the resources we had and try to find better ways of using them really appealed to me, and then hopefully the money comes.
But part of the trouble with rural Arizona is not just the monetary resources, but the therapy resources.
Agreed.
Yep.
You know, we have no inpatient drug treatment center anywhere close by. Maricopa County is the closest. We don't have a lot of local outpatient treatment. The sheriff and I partnered with our health department to bring an outside contractor in to do an inpatient in the jail for up to 90 days and then outpatient while they're on probation. We're hoping that the health district has the money to continue it next year, trying to do more with less, but sometimes you just hit the wall.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and it's another way, another area where the cooperation between the different governmental components is important. For example, we know in probation, you'll have probationers who might live up on the reservation fairly remotely, but they're under the court supervision here. So if we can use Navajo personnel to do the probation, you save a lot of travel money and time. Conversely, if they have someone who's working down here and living down here, we can do the same. And you know, it's one way where you can do a little better with what you have.
So I don't know if you can talk about it or not. Do you have a case that you think has stood out to you, one of the most interesting cases that either one of you have made decisions on over the years, or?
Well, let's see. We had a case last year that I wrote, and that's why it sticks out for me, that decided about, it was a case on whether non-impairing metabolites of marijuana were chargeable under the DUI statute. It was only remarkable from my perspective because it got a lot of public comment, and
Still has public comment.
Certainly people on both sides of that issue, and so I found it interesting. But in terms of the impact of it, I don't know that it stands out. Chief?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I think it's hard to be objective in gauging the impact of the decisions. They're all vitally important to the people involved in that particular case, and most of our cases present some interesting legal issues. I find it's hard when you deal with cases that involve particularly juvenile victims of crime, and you see the impact that often substance abuse has had in those crimes. And it's hard. I think anyone involved in the criminal justice system sees a a number of those cases, and it's just hard. It wears on you as a person, and we've had some cases like that I'll probably never forget. That I think of as, they might not be in the grand scheme of things the most important cases, but in terms of the impact, at least on me, they were pretty hard.
Right.
So.
You both sound like children are a big issue with you, and I think one of the areas that the courts oversee is CASA and the Foster Care Review Board. Can you talk about those two and what they do, and if people can be involved, if they have the same caring and compassion about kids that you guys share?
Well, and we do. We do both have a strong passion for that as an issue in our courts. Justice Brutinel was a long-time juvenile judge and was regarded by people around the state as one of our preeminent juvenile judges. In our strategic agenda, one of our goals is protecting children, family, and communities. You mentioned CASA and the Foster Care Review Boards. That reflects that under Arizona's laws, children who are taken out of their homes, who are in dependency proceedings, perhaps to terminate their parental rights, their status has to be periodically reviewed by foster care review boards, and those boards are made up of volunteers. And they have a pretty demanding volume of cases, because the dependency cases in Arizona, sadly, since the recession, have just skyrocketed. And the children who are involved in dependency proceedings also can have court-appointed special advocates. That's what CASAs are. People there to, they're not lawyers, but they're there to help identify and speak for the children in terms of their interests. I said I think that we have about 10,000 people working in the court system. We have about 2,000 other people who are volunteers, and we're always looking for people who want to get involved, whether as CASAs and court-appointed or on foster care review boards, or on things like the judicial nominating committees that I mentioned.
CASAs do a tremendous service for the children in the juvenile justice system. You have to understand that these are children who have been taken away from their parents. They're taken because they're being abused or they're being neglected. But no matter why you take a child out of the house, it's going to be the most traumatic thing that ever happened in the child's life, no matter how bad home is. And they go into a huge, particularly in the largest counties, a huge bureaucratic system. As you talked about the lack of therapy resources in Navajo County, that's certainly true statewide, particularly in the rural counties. But you have children who are going to go from therapist to therapist if they can have a therapist at all. The average lifespan of a CPS case manager on the job is less than 2 years. So CPS case managers change all the time. Lawyers change. The one constant in a child's life, if one has been appointed, is a CASA. Somebody who is going to know about that case and who is going to be, as they like to say, a child's voice in court. So the CASA is a lay person, just a person who out of the goodness of their heart is willing to volunteer. We provide them with some training about how to do that job. The CASA gets to know that child. The CASA gets to know the foster home. The child gets to know what's going on in the case. And every time the court has a review, which has to be every 6 months, and I think I used to do them about every 30 days, that CASA is going to come to court and tell you what ought to happen with that child. And I will tell you, I listened very closely to what the CASAs told me. They provide a tremendous service. The CASAs are the people that eventually get invited to the weddings and get invited to the christenings and get invited to the high school and college graduations from those kids as they make their way through the system and become productive citizens again.
So about how much of a time commitment is it to be a CASA?
You know, it can be about as much as you want. Since we're so grateful to have the volunteers, we're pretty flexible. We're going to want you to go to some training. That'll take a day or two. There's actually a program in Phoenix we'll send you to if you're able to go. There's a background investigation because we want to know that you're safe with these kids. But after that, you're probably talking about a day or two a month.
And you also talked about a foster care review board, and they look at those cases. What type of time commitment and responsibilities do those people have?
If you're a local FCRB member, you're probably going to spend a day or so a month reading the cases and then a day at the hearings. And you're going to sit down as a foster care review member, and the CPS case manager and the lawyers and the parents are going to come, and the foster parents typically are going to come in, talk about what's going on in the case, talk about what the system's doing right and what the system's doing wrong, and then they'll provide a report to the judge. And I will tell you, as a judge, I read those very closely as well. They really do make a difference. And if somebody's interested in volunteering, I know they can use the help here in Navajo County as they can across the state. We're very grateful for people who are willing to do that.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time. There's so much more I'd love to talk to the two of you about, but I have to just thank you for sharing with us.
Our pleasure.
And
One
coming
quick
and
question.
getting-
Are either one of you from, or alumni from ASU, the great university? Can we trust you? Are you from ASU?
Oh, wait a minute, I understand Brad has a degree from a different school.
Yes, yes.
I have a degree from both of them. So.
Okay. Well, anyway, thank you
Great
much.
to have the chance
You
to
bet.
talk with you.
Prompter. Okay. Thank you for joining us for Shooting Straight with Brad and Casey. Now stay tuned for our most wanted of this month.
For this month's Most Wanted is Kenneth J. Wilson. Kenneth J. Wilson is a white male, 54 years old, has blue eyes and brown hair. Kenneth Wilson currently has a felony warrant out at Navajo County Superior Court for conducting a chop shop with a $100,000 bond. Kenneth was last known to live in Apache Junction, but has lived in Show Low and still has associates in Navajo County. If found, please call Navajo County Sheriff's Office or local police department, or contact WeTip to remain anonymous.